welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And as usual, I'm your host, Sam Mickey. And this week, happy to welcome onto the program a few really interesting writers and scholars that share a fondness for trees. It's Leah Rampy, Beth Norcross, Laura Pustarfi. Thanks so much for making time for us, especially coordinating across different time zones. Laura, you and I are on the West Coast of the United States. Leah and Beth, you're on the East Coast. And coordinating two people for the podcast is often difficult. Getting all four of us together, I think that deserves a round of applause by itself. But to begin with, I'd like to offer you each a chance just to say a brief intro about who you are. Like, who are you and what are you doing here? We'll start with you, Beth.
Well, thanks, Sam, and thanks for this opportunity. And such a great privilege to be with these scholars and spiritual leaders. I am Beth Norcross. I have a degree in forestry and I've spent a lot of time out in the woods ecologically and spiritually. I live here in the Potomac River Basin in the beautiful deciduous forest, uh, traditional lands of the Piscataway. And from a young age, really quite drawn to trees, as well as finding others who find quite literally kindred spirits in the trees and wanted to pursue that more. And we'll talk some more about that. That's who I am.
Wonderful. Leah.
Well, I echo Beth's thanks to you, and it's great to be here with you, Sam, and with you, Laura. And Beth and I have the opportunity to do this together, not infrequently, so it's lovely to be able to be in this company. I am Leah Rampy. I live in West Virginia, just about an hour from Beth. So we both share the Potomac River as our drinking water. And we're just a little bit further upstream than Beth is. I have had a number of different careers. I've kind of lost track of which one I'm on. But over the past 3 or 4 years, I have spent most of my time doing writing and offering retreat leadership, pilgrimage leadership, and inviting people into falling in love ever more deeply with this beautiful living world around us. I live in a co-housing community with my husband, and we help, along with the other people who live here, to care for and love the trees that we have in conservation area.
Wonderful. That's great. Laura, a little about you.
Thank you, Sam. And also, so wonderful to be here with all three of you and to get a chance to talk a bit about trees. So, I'm a plant studies scholar focused on trees primarily in primarily the history of Western philosophy. And as you mentioned, Sam, I'm here on the West Coast in Sonoma County, which is traditional lands of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok peoples. I want to acknowledge that. And I've had an enduring interest in trees for quite a long time. My primary interest is in ecology and spirituality. And I was fortunate to be able to study that at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And now I'm adjunct faculty in that program. And I'm also a director of a certificate program there at CIAS as well.
Wonderful. And people who know the podcast know that the California Institute of Integral Studies is also where I got my doctorate, and so always appreciate that legacy, the work that comes out. I mean, people really respect that institution despite the fact that it's so marginalized by mainstream institutions. And so it really is riding that kind of growing edge of what education can be. And so really happy to have you all on here, especially talking about trees. And here's the thing that you all have in common, right? Is not just talking about trees from an ecological perspective, but also from this perspective that acknowledges some spiritual dimension to our relationship to trees. And that is something that I think a lot of people in mainstream scientific contexts are only starting to learn. And so it's such an exciting moment. And I mean, I think of like the environmental movement in the 60s, and then that gives birth to things like the animal rights movement and deep ecology. And then it was this mind-blowing idea that animals might have consciousness and intelligence and communication and feelings. And then gradually we're like, oh, wait a second. I think maybe the whole Earth community has this going on. And so there's a couple books I have to mention. One, this is our Earth Day episode. And on Earth Day, Beth and Leah have a wonderful book coming out called Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. And then it'll be about 5 or 6 weeks later in the beginning of June. Laura has a wonderful book coming out that she edited with David Macauley called The Wisdom of Trees Thinking Through Arboreality. And you also had a chapter recently in a book called The Vegetal Turn. So you all are doing so much research and writing on something that, to my mind, is like the cutting edge of people's acknowledgement that we are in fact part of a living Earth community, and that life, intelligence, sentience, wisdom, all of these nebulous terms, but they're not just something locked up in the human, they're distributed around the whole Earth community. So I guess to begin with Beth and Leah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing with this book that, when this airs, will be available today.
Leah, would you like to start?
Well, you can jump right in, Beth. Go ahead. I'll pick up wherever you leave off.
I think that in our work, our combined work and our individual work, and I should have mentioned that I started something called the Center for Spirituality and Nature. We've been around for 10 years now. And the thrust of that organization is really part and parcel what we're trying to do with the book, which is to bring people back into the natural world, to have them experience firsthand those connections. In our book, in particular, those connections with trees, and to see themselves as part of this spiritual collective or this sacred collective. And as we spent time studying trees and experiencing trees, Leah and I found, as did the many participants in our program, that trees have a particular wisdom that is worth sharing, which is worth knowing about for their own benefit, but for ours as well. That trees have been around in some form for 350 million years, and they've learned a few things about how to survive and how to thrive, particularly in the midst of the many challenges they faced: fire, infestation, so forth. And we are in a time of particular challenge. I think we can all agree that there's an anxiety out there, a concern for both human and non-human right now that can be particularly paralyzing. So trees, we think, have a special message in how they are resilient, how they demonstrate renewal, how they demonstrate rebirth. And we could go on and on and on, how they live in both the light and the darkness. And that we wanted to share this with the world, and hope we're doing that through this book.
Nice. I like that a
Yeah, I
lot.
would maybe just add on to that, Beth. Thank you. I think that lays it out very well. We have found that there's such an invitation from trees for us to move into our deeper sense of open, available presence to our spirituality, moving beyond simply the thinking mind. I think there's an incredible amount of awe and wonder that we have access to as we begin to understand the science of trees. And Beth and I are sort of fond of saying, and there's more, that it's not only about that thinking mind, it's about this open, available heart being present too through all of our senses and through the imaginal realm, being present to the living world around us in ways that really strike at the heart of communion
Mm.
and go beyond what we might want to label or judge or name. we can really see another way of being. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity and gift to be in relationship with trees.
Right. I mean, yeah, where would we be without photosynthesis? And so, yeah, that the level of dependence on trees, easy, because I think there's a thing because they don't have mobility in the way that animals do. It's easy to forget how important they are. We like to see things that can get up and run around and pass their genes around so rapidly. And so it's easy as animals, I think, to forget how important trees are. And so, Laura, I wonder if you could add a little more context to this because like I was saying, this isn't something people were talking about a couple decades ago. Well, I mean, of course, is considering that you all acknowledged the indigenous lands that you're on. Of course, indigenous people were aware of this, but the scientific community, by and large, not really aware of it. And now people are talking about this turn, this vegetal turn, where people are focusing more on plants and trees. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to this, what our moment is about.
That's a great question, Sam. And things have changed over the last few decades as concern regard has been expanded to plants and trees. But Beth and Leah, especially Leah, I loved what you were saying about relationships. And that's such a key part of my work also is relationships with trees. We'll get a chance to talk more about that. Over the past few years, this vegetal turn in the humanities has been happening as well, which is following some of the recent science that's come out around capacities in plants and in trees. So some of the key thinkers in that are Suzanne Simard's work on the mycorrhizal networks between mushrooms, fungi, and trees, um, and many others about various capacities, which I think of in terms of in, intelligence, relationality, and agency
Hmm.
with trees and plants. And the term that's been used in the scientific community has is typically plant signaling and behavior. Some of the terms that you had used, Sam, consciousness, intelligence, sentience, or cognition, are at issue there. And then following on that, scholars in the humanities have started looking at trees and plants in different ways as trees and plants themselves and thinking about those relational connections. And that's a big part of my work in the realm of philosophy and primarily continental philosophy, looking phenomenologically at trees. What what can be observed in relationship with a tree when myself as a human I'm standing in front of a tree, and what happens in that relational space, thinking about it as a relationship to another individual being. And it's an interesting thought experiments with that, and like to invite others into that as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And I mean, especially realizing, yeah, plant signaling and behavior scientists are very comfortable talking about, and then all of a sudden you say spiritual wisdom, and they're like, oh, I don't know about that. And then even think sentience, intelligence, consciousness. And I appreciate how contested these terms are, and like seeing people who are pushing that envelope. And personally, sometimes when scientists get a little upset when spiritual folks and philosophical folks are kind of pushing them, I kind of like seeing them a little upset, especially knowing, I mean, geez, a few hundred years ago, scientists were just saying animals are just machines, plants are just machines, and they aren't capable of any agency or signaling or communication. And so I think scientists might need a little epistemic humility, as it were, that maybe you don't know everything. And but this issue of the relationship we have with trees, I think, is really important. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Laura, because it's one thing just to read textbooks. It's another thing to have these relationships, standing in front of a tree, experiencing a tree directly. So I wonder if all of you could kind of talk a little bit more about that, because I know in all of your work, this isn't just an intellectual endeavor. It's very much about a personal relationship to different trees, and of course, the variety of species, even thinking again, we're on the West Coast, me and Laura and Leah and Beth, you're on the East Coast. So such different ecosystems. So what are some of the trees and the relationships with trees that have been meaningful to you? Anybody can start, and feel free to talk over one another. We can get a little raucous.
Well, I'm going to jump in at that invitation because I just wanted to make a comment about, as you're talking about how this understanding may be unfolding. I'm fond of mentioning a quote from Hildegard of Bingen in some of my retreats, and it was something along the lines of everything on earth and under earth is penetrated with relatedness, penetrated with connectedness. And I remind people that mystics and the wise ones from 900 plus years ago, and of course, indigenous peoples and those living close to the land have known about this relationship. It is the middle piece along the way, and the kind of the overlay of Western culture that has forgotten or not seen some of those connections. So I love that some of the work you're doing, Laura, and the reading that Beth and I have done, we're reconnecting to that way of being in relationship with the living world around us and reminding ourselves that it's possible. I'm going to say real quickly, I grew up in Kansas, and I think I love trees so much because there were so few in
Mm.
Kansas. So my first love was the cottonwood tree. And I know that many people would think that that's kind of a weedy, junky tree now. And in fact, people would like to cut it down. But I maintain that if you can offer shade in the depths of Kansas summers and live through the winters and have those beautiful shining leaves that sing to you at night in the wind, that it's worth putting up with a little bit of cotton just to have that beauty, that song, and that shade. So I'll name that into our circle as one of my trees.
Nice. I like that a lot. Yeah. Good shout out to Cottonwood. Like we can put up with a little cotton. It's not that bad.
I have so many trees that have touched me over the years. It's hard to choose, but I mention one. I do a lot of hiking in Shenandoah National Park, not too far from our homes. And there's a tree on the top of the ridge that has grown this way and that way, and then this way, and then finally up.
Hmm.
And it really inspires me. And, every tree has a story, and we each have a story too. And it's as I bring groups out and we find trees like that, can you imagine times when you've had to grow straight, you can't go up, and you have to go down for a while, and then maybe you get to go up toward the sun again.
Hmm.
Those kinds of trees really inspire me. And I wanted to get in here just briefly on the comments that Laura and Leah were making in regard to connection and the role of how we're reluctant to use these terms of consciousness around plants and so forth. We were asked last night in an interview, do you think trees get lonely?
Mm.
And I think part of our issue is that we use these human terms, this human language to define something that's, has its own consciousness and its own sense of self and value, perhaps in a different way. And is the tree, does the tree have a brain as similar to ours where we feel sad? I don't know. But I do know from reading the science that the trees yearn for connection, that they're always moving toward other. They want that. And if they don't have it, is that loneliness? That what is loneliness after all? It's yearning for another.
Mm.
And so I would submit to you that trees are in fact lonely. And again, this language kind of gets in the way. So I'll stop there, but both Leah and I have had some experiences with your big trees out west, most recently with the sequoias. And
Mm.
that is a very humbling place-defining forest that has also been meaningful. But I'll let Laura get into it.
I love this question about relationships, and I've certainly had relationships with many trees out here on the West Coast, primarily redwoods, which I think of sometimes I think of trees as charismatic megaflora, and redwoods seem very much that way, and very much entangled with the landscape here and the destruction of the forest as well. So, but I want to talk about relationship too as a bit more mundane. We're talking about spirituality, but relationship is built in that regular connection. I think with more than human others, relationships require that attention. And I found that walking the same trail over and over or visiting the same tree over and over is the way to build that connection, seeing a tree through different seasons. Where I live now, I have a sweet gum tree right outside my window here, and I grew up in the Southeast US, so for me it's a nice connection to that. But seeing the balls drop, and then right now the little bits of the leaves are just starting to pop out with the spring, and watching that day to day, that to me is the relationship, is the connection to the tree. And I've done a little bit of work with mindfulness and trees. So there the spirituality comes out as well, in terms of really slowing down and coming into presence as to what's happening in that particular space in that particular time. But I do think that it's a regular connection to build a relationship with any being.
And
That's
you
a nice
mentioned
point. I really
attention,
appreciate that.
this intentionality around attention. I think we are drawn to, studies would show we're drawn to people who, look like us from the time we're babies. And so to connect with other beyond people who look like us, we have to be intentional, even in the human sphere. And in the non-human sphere, we have to be particularly attentive and intentional about that attention if we want to connect with the megaflora.
And I wanted to add, Laura, I thought you might be interested to know that Beth and I invite people in the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees classes that we've done for 4 years, but also in the practices in our book, to choose or be chosen by a teacher tree, and to let yourself find a tree that particularly calls to you. Doesn't have to be the biggest one in the forest or the most magnificent, but one that just invites you, so that that's one to which you return time and again to make that connection you're talking about. So we really agree and support and understand that, and think it's just has been, for the people in our classes, such a wonderful opportunity to develop that relationship.
That's great. That's a great way of thinking about it. I appreciate how invitational that is. Um, because again, talking about how contested some of these terms are and some of the language, we're like, well, I don't know what the right words are, but I invite you to find them for yourself. Encounter the tree, develop a relationship, and then you'll find the way to put it into language. And then something like intelligence or consciousness or feeling or yearning, loneliness, communion, all these terms, see how they emerge in your own world. And I appreciate that a lot. I mean, I know, for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, we've been dealing with this the whole time. And that you say stuff about ecology, but then you throw religious language on it, and all kinds of people get upset. And you're like, look, I don't have the answer, but I invite you to find your own experience, build your own relationship. And especially, I appreciate, Laura, that you're talking about how the spiritual side of things doesn't have to be opposed to the mundane. And it's the everydayness of it that can really bring these things forth. And it's too easy to think spirituality has to be these amazing experiences, something mind-blowing and transcendent. Like, no, it's here and now as well.
Well, that makes me think too, and Sam, if you don't mind me asking a question of you, in the book that's coming out, The Wisdom of Trees, you have a chapter, and you talk about aversion to trees and useless trees. So I wonder if you might want to say anything about that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And by the way, yeah, I can't say enough good things about the amazing contributors that you've assembled for that book. And so it's very humbling and quite an honor to be part of it because some of my favorite people are in there. I mean, Al Lingus and Ed Casey and stuff. I'm just like amazing. And so I think people are really going to enjoy that book from a lot of different perspectives. And yeah, if there's a tree that means a lot to me, it's oak trees because they're so naughty and not like naughty. I mean, like they're naughty, whatever. And but because of that, they're hard to use for lumber. And and so there's a story in the Taoist text Zhuangzi, which is just called the Zhuangzi. It's written by a guy named Zhuangzi. And most people, I think of Taoism, think of the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So different, slightly later text, and really surprisingly different. They're lumped in together as Taoist, but they're very different texts. Anyway, Zhuangzi tells a story about a useless tree, and it's an oak tree that's so twisted up that nobody can use it. And because nobody can use it, it survives. And so being useless is actually like good news. And I think of that, I mean, in our capitalist system, uh, that we're all overworked. Everybody's overworked and underpaid, exploited labor all over the place. And maybe being useless helps you get some time off. And obviously, there's all kinds of discussions of how to resist our exploitive economy. But one of them is just to kind of drop out of it. And one of my favorite authors lately is Jenny Odell. She's based in Oakland, and she wrote this wonderful book called How to Do Nothing. And it's about doing nothing. And like that doesn't mean laying on the floor and looking up at the ceiling, but it means finding a way to slip through the cracks of our exploitative economic system. And that means things like hanging out with trees. And she talks about the rose garden in Oakland in particular. She's like, yeah, you just go there and hang out with roses. Or for her, also crows in Oakland. And there's things, there's like, yeah, there's some crows that come to my balcony. And I gave them some seeds and nuts. Now they come back with friends. And I just made friends with crows. And so, yeah, so I'm all about doing nothing and being useless. And people are like, Sam, are you okay? That sounds so negative. But I'm like, no, it's about resisting things. And so sometimes when philosophers get too excited about trees, I'm like, hey, leave those trees alone. And and we don't want to include them in our knowledge production, our capitalist production. We want to let them be. And so to me, letting things be means not using them, not doing something with them, doing nothing with them. And so, I'm very influenced also by the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, and he's all about letting things be, letting beings be. And so I'm always trying to think of that. And whether that's plants or animals or fungi or humans or art or architecture or whatever, how to just let things be. So, yeah, I know it sounds cantankerous to be like, I think we should not like trees. But it's like, well, of course we should like trees, but if we like them too much, and all of a sudden we're using them and overusing them and abusing them. And so there's a light touch that we need to take. And I think all of you are doing exactly that kind of work.
Mhm.
You're taking that light touch where there's not this triumphal claim that finally we've understood trees. It's like, well, it's an invitation to deepen our relationship to trees. It's not this triumphal understanding where we finally figured it out. And honestly, I think there are some scientists out there, some philosophers, some economists, some resource management experts that think they've figured it out. And I always worry about that. I guess
Mhm.
that's the philosophical tendency I have is you should never think you figured it out. Keep the wonder going, keep the inquiry going, keep building that relationship. But the minute you think you've understood something, I worry about that kind of closure a lot. I mean, this is
Mhm.
just relationship advice too. It's like, don't think you understood somebody. And it's important to admit that look, I don't fully understand something or
Mhm.
someone. And even understanding if something is something or someone. Is it a thing? Is it a person? Who knows? And so
Mhm.
trying to keep that invitation to wonder going, I think, is a big part of our work. So yeah, long answer to a short question. But yeah, thanks, Laura, for bringing it up. And again, thanks for assembling such an amazing collection of authors for that book. So can't say enough good things about both of these books,
Yeah.
The Wisdom of Trees for Laura and Discovering Spiritual Wisdom of Trees for Leah and Beth. Really just amazing texts, and knowing that they're only both coming out kind of right now, right? I'm excited to see how the field receives them. Of course, the field is already a suspicious metaphor. What's this field? Is it a forest? Is it a grassland? Is it an agricultural landscape? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know,
Sick.
one of the things
Oops.
that we
Go ahead.
were very aware of when we were writing the book and discovering the spiritual wisdom of trees, we we didn't want to yet again use trees solely for our own benefit. That there's a and I came out actually of the spent some time in the timber industry and learned a lot actually about who's in charge. Generally, it's not the guys and gals in the field. That's a little teaser for perhaps a book. A lot is happening in New York. Um, but in any event, we would talk about trees as resources when I was with the timber industry and in forestry school. And we wanted to make sure that trees, again, are not a resource to teach us, how to live in solely for hard times. That their wisdom, it's a very reciprocal relationship, and that we've leaned a lot on Robin Wall Kimmerer and her work on reciprocity, and her lovely work on surface area. And of course, she has this newer book on that. But not to only be taking from trees, even if it's wisdom,
Mhm.
but what does that listening, what is that two-way or multi-way street? What are we learning from the trees that we and then can give back? And I'm sensitive too, having been in the industry, um, that we want to not commodify trees. And yet I think we all have wooden bookcases behind us. And so it's sometimes important to bring the tree all the way into the living, that there is a tree with whom we have a relationship which we don't want to lose. What tree made those bookcases in my floor and so forth? And so what do we ask of the forest more generally?
Yeah, beautifully said.
Lee, I think I stepped on you. Do you remember where you were going?
Well, we were going to a similar place, Beth. I just wanted to say that when we use the term using, it does have some sense of human-centric notion that we are not, as Robin Wall Kimmerer would say, the younger brothers and sisters who are learning from the rest of the beings, the small little leaf on the family tree, but rather we are ones who know and are profiting from, put that in quotes. So I was going to make a similar point to where you were going and appreciate and lift up, Sam, this idea of going the other way and being useless, to take that term use out of our vocabulary for a moment and play with that and see what that causes to open for us in a different way of being with other beings.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I appreciate that because I know it can sound very negative to stand up for the uselessness of something. It's like, no, it has no value, no use. And what are you saying? Like, no, I'm just trying to let things be, or just trying to get people to relax, basically. And it's funny how we get so excited about some of these new scientific discoveries, like the mother tree. And it's like, oh, this tree is funneling nutrients to these other trees. This is amazing. And I'm just like, okay, slow down, take a breath. It's very exciting that we're in such an amazing, wondrous world. But I need everybody to relax. And then I think we can process this information in a really healthy way. Especially, I mean, what happened since the environmental movement when we got so excited about some of these discoveries? Like things have gotten worse. It's this really complicated thing that I try and hold is like environmental concern is higher now than it has been in the last 50 years. More and more people care about these things. And yet, we're on track this year to have the most carbon emissions ever, historically, breaking the previous record, which was last year, which broke the previous record, which was the previous year. So, how are things getting so much better with people caring? And yet things are getting so much worse. And so that's when I start talking about maybe we need to be a little carefree. If we care too much, I don't know it's helping. So somewhere between being careful and careless, there's this maybe a virtue of being carefree. But yeah, it's complicated. How are things getting better and worse at the same time? Where it's such a strange moment, which is why I think some of the stuff that you're doing is so important because you're just inviting people into that relationship. And once you're in that relationship, you might figure out how to make the world a better place. And because nobody is going to have the right answer. I don't know if there is an answer, but there's reciprocal relationships, respectful relationships, the honorable harvest, and things like that. So, yeah, it's difficult work, and I appreciate that you're all engaging in it. It's such a difficult time because some people just shut down, and you're like, no, we need to think about this stuff. Now is a time for deep thinking and deep relationship, and all of you are inviting these kind of experiences for people. So it's so important right now.
Well, I'm going to lift up to the word curiosity. I think that's really important. And the hubris of surety, we all know about that. And it's easy to slip into that sense that we have the answer. Um, and for me, when I think about how do we explain all of this, some of this is just inexplicable. Much of it is inexplicable. I would suggest that part of this journey, because it's a spiritual journey, is that greater understanding of what's ours to do.
Mhm.
What is my soul, SOUL work? What is my soul work that I'm invited into? And how does that align with the living world around me and what the living world is inviting? So that I may be doing work that I will never live to see the result of. That's what I hope. I hope it is beyond my lifetime. And I hope that, kind of in the way that Merton says it, I hope I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But of course, there's no real knowing whether that's true or not. But we're trusting that there is something each of us are called to. And beyond our lifetimes, there are ways that that's weaving together that is well beyond our knowing.
Yep, really well said. Yeah, I appreciate the reference to Merton. So that's a good guide for our times.
I want to bring
And
in one
then
other
go ahead, Laura.
thing that you were kind of pointing to this a bit, Sam, but in terms of the teachings of trees and moving into relationships with trees, of course, one of the reasons that humans have been so slow to understand trees better is because they are not on human time. They move much more slowly. So I think one of the lessons for me has been to slow down. And that might be one of the ways that with moving into relationships with trees and slowing down, being more cognizant as humans of what we're doing, as we're caring, as we're moving forward. Maybe one way to think about it as well.
I think too that as we have a series of practices at the end of, a practice for each chapter that hopes to continue this invitation and this attention, intention, in drawing people into relationship. And we have one practice in particular that we call What's It Like to Be You? And it actually draws you into what it's like to be a tree or an ant or a millipede or a bird or whatever it might be. And but the last question that we ask in that practice is, am I doing anything to harm you? And so that when we start, like any loving relationship, and first do no harm. My I have this habit of treating my husband particularly well on his birthday. And so I try for subsequent days, sometimes doesn't last very long, to say, okay, pretend it's his birthday today. What would I say today if would I bring that up if it were his birthday? And the answer is often no. And so this idea of doing no harm to this person whom I love and have been in relationship for decades. And so if we bring that same attitude toward trees or any part of the non-human world, what is it what is this that I am doing that is potentially harmful to you? Is it the way that I buy paper products? Is it the fact that I am overly dependent and love wood? So many of us who love trees love wood. And, on and on and on, looking at our behaviors through the eyes of the beloved. And in this relationship becomes one of, one might say, active love. And yes, Laura, you're absolutely right. Taking the time for discernment, for listening. What is it? What do you need? Perhaps you need me to just stop and notice you. Again, as you would a beloved. Is there a way that I'm harming you? I'm hurting you in some ways, my behavior. And those linkages you were talking, Sam, earlier about more people care, but more damage is being done. It's behooves all of us who are in love with any aspect of the non-human world to look and see how our actions are affecting that object, if you will, using the word loosely, of our affection.
Yeah, I love that. What's it like to be you practice? I think that's so great, and works on just about anything. It's certainly great for trees, but even a stone. I know like a geologist like Marcia Bjornrud is telling us about the wisdom of stones. And like
Yes.
talk about patience. Look at tectonic plates and things like this. It's incredible. And so yeah, my ethical advice to people is hurry up and slow down. Um, and we need an urgent rush for people to slow down. I also like the idea of treating every day like it's people's birthday. That is so hard to do. And sometimes I get irritated when people treat me nice on my birthday for that reason. And maybe that's because I'm an Aquarius. I don't know. Is that an Aquarius thing to do? Maybe. But but like to treat everything like, okay, who are you? What's it like to be you? And how can I honor you like this is your birthday? I think it's just such a beautiful sentiment. It reminds me of the 20th century Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. He says there's two ways to relate to things. It's I and it, or it's I and you. Which I should say, some people are like, no, it's I thou. Like, no, that's a mistranslation. He doesn't use the proper form. He uses the du, not the z, right? If you know German, it's ich du, not ich sie. And so it's technically I you, and it's this familiar feeling. It's not this thou putting something on a pedestal. It's a very familiar feeling, like, who are you? What's it like to be you? So yeah, I think, and for some reason, that's just so hard to do. And I can treat you like it's your birthday about one day a year, maybe a few, and then you sink back, sink back into just being our normal jerks. And, uh, but again, that's why I just appreciate the work you're all doing so much because you bring it into such stark relief that this isn't. I feel like sometimes people think caring about the environment is like a homework assignment. They're like, oh no, more things to care about. I'm like, it's more beautiful relationships to have. It's more friends to have. And it actually feels really good to do this kind of work because it is that curiosity, that invitation. It's actually a joy.
I want to add to that, we're really wired for this too. I mean, that this is so intrinsic to who we are, this need for connection. And we can look back through generation upon generation where our ancestors had to know intimately the land, the trees, the plants, the animals around them. If they did not, we would not be here. And so that's within us. And when we don't acknowledge and live into that, we're deeply lonely and we're heartsick. And we know a lot about how we're lonely for other people. Surgeon General talked a lot about that over the past few decades or so. We don't often pay attention to how lonely we are for the living world around us and our need for those connections. And perhaps, as Beth pointed out earlier, that the living world is lonely for us as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well said. I think sometimes people think that in order to develop a more sustainable relationship to the environment, we're going to have to sacrifice a lot. And I'm like, no, we're currently sacrificing a lot. We're so lonely and so deprived of all of our ecological intimacy. That's the sacrifice. We can stop doing that and actually enter into these relationships, stop feeling so lonely, start feeling a lot more fulfilled. And we're already giving up. The current status quo is us giving up a lot. And we're like, well, but I like my private jet or my yacht. Like, trust me, that's not making you as happy as you think it might be. I'm in a weird position where I tell people that they're not as happy as they think they might be. Real happiness, go talk to a tree.
My rabbi friend would tell us that the root of sacrifice and sacred is the same. That it's really an honor to put other beings first.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such an important point. It feels good, makes you happy. And again, it's just like the curiosity. It's like you get to explore more. And well, I guess on that note, speaking of curiosity and exploring more and deepening your relationships, of course, all of you have these wonderful texts coming out, so you'll be promoting those texts. But what's next? Because I know this isn't the end. So I'm curious to hear, and maybe you can start, Laura. What's next for your work and for your life, for that matter, but especially your engagement with arboreality, with trees, thinking with trees, being with trees, connecting with trees. Or are you saying maybe I'm done with trees and I'm going to start focusing on water? Who knows? But I'm done with scholarly work. I'm just going to be an activist, going to run for office. So I'm just always happy to hear what other projects people have going, and who knows what will happen with those projects, but happy to hear kind of just where you feel like you might be headed next.
That's a great question. Thank you, Sam. And I'm very excited to promote this book, The Wisdom of Trees, with my co-editor, David Macauley, coming up here in the summer this year. And then I am working on at least one, maybe two other books on trees. So I'm working on a book titled Arboreality, focusing on those ideas of intelligence, relationality, and agency, particularly in the Western paradigm, and bringing that out. I am under contract with a publisher for that book at this
Cool.
point, and then I'd love to keep working on arboreal philosophy. So I'm working on developing a class for the fall called Thinking with Vegetal Life. So bringing that forward, especially looking at sacred plants as well, looking at the vegetal turn and psychedelic plants in particular. So continuing to work on those scholarly ideas, and continuing to sit with and think with the trees, certainly for myself, and that idea of arboreality, what is reality, what is a metaphysical um, perspective that really includes the beingness of trees, the subjectivity and individuality of trees. What might that look like from our human situatedness, our human perspective? Is something that continues to fascinate me. So I said earlier it was an enduring interest, and I chose that word in particular because that word is connected to trees etymologically as well. So continuing to explore and have curiosity around all of that for myself. So thanks for asking.
That's great. Well, yeah, when the next book comes out, we'll have to have you back on the podcast to talk about it. And big recommendation to anybody listening is take that class in the fall. That sounds great, especially because I'm guessing that's online.
It will be
Uh,
online.
yeah,
Yeah, with
and one of the
also with
great
CIS.
things,
Yeah.
yeah, with the California Institute of Integral Studies, the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program has a lot of online offerings. So I don't care where you are on the planet, you can sign up and take that class, and other classes. There's so many good things happening with that program. But that sounds like one not to miss. It's one of those things where sometimes I wish I was still in school, and it's at some
You're
point
welcome,
you.
Sam. You can come.
I don't know. I have classes to teach, and so I don't get as much time to learn as much as I'd like. And but you learn through teaching and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, sounds awesome. That's just excellent stuff. And happy to hear that you have that enduring relationship with trees, because so much more still needs to be said and to be thought about. So Beth, Leah, what's next for the two of you?
Well, I should raise up our 6-week class on the spiritual wisdom of trees, which form the basis of this much more expanded work, is an ongoing class at the Center for Spirituality and Nature also. It's a video class. It's been well received. You can sign up at spiritualityandnature.org at any moment. So that's always available. I think for me, I've just stepped down from the executive director role at the center. And of course, we're publicizing this book and marketing the book and doing all we can to get this out there. And I think for me, then it's a time, frankly, of discernment, a little bit of rest. I'd like to, I think, where it will lead me is on a speaking tour. I think that the work that we've been doing around the trees, as well as the other elements of the non-human world, deserve much broader attention than they've had. I had an opportunity to do a little TED talk, a small TED talk in last year, and I enjoyed that, and I is really trying to think about how to get this message out into the general public beyond the scientists and the religious leaders and even the philosophers. Laura, just this is such an important message that I think will enhance their lives, human lives, and the life of the earth. That I feel like that's where I'm being pulled to, but I'll let you know. And you just told us all to stop, so I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah, hey,
Leah,
take a
what's up
break.
with you?
Yeah. Well, in 2024, I've published my first book, Earth and Soul: Reconnecting Amid Climate Chaos. I wrote that book because I wanted to be in the conversation about how we live fully alive, deeply connected, looking fiercely into what is as it is, allowing our hearts to break, and also deeply, deeply connecting to the living world. I wanted to be in that conversation, and I still do. I love being in dialogue with book groups and leading retreats on that topic. I'm looking forward to more retreats leading with Beth. We have a couple of this coming up this year on discovering the spiritual wisdom of trees. It's all part and parcel of a fabric of conversation and invitation to people to come into the living world and to see how we make that spiritual journey that allows us to deepen our very rich, always inextricable links, even when we fail to remember that. I'm writing on Substack. I have a weekly column there. I'll be teaching in our lifelong learning class at Shepherd University in the fall. And my topic is always ecology and writers who are bringing to the fore work I find to be really interesting. And I'm part of a group called Save Our Soil, and we advocate locally for clean water, for soil health, local food, and native plants and trees. We have a Miyawaki forest here on our land, and we're writing and teaching about that, using it as a model. So those are the things that I am deeply interested in, conversations about this amazing world in which we live and how it beckons to our hearts.
Wonderful. All right. You're all doing too much. Too much stuff. Uh, no, but seriously, I really appreciate the retreats, the teachings, the writings. You're all doing so many different offerings to invite people into this kind of work and this kind of way of living, this way of being, this way of knowing. And couldn't be more appropriate for our Earth Day episode. So thanks so much for making this happen. And here's how I've been wanting to end the podcast lately, where, and I normally just have one guest, so this is going to be complicated. But I want people to just give me a word. Could just be one word. I like the idea of one word, but that's a burden. Because especially writers, you have so many words. And so a word or a phrase, and occasionally that turns into a run-on sentence, and that's fine. But I want to basically give you the last word. And so we'll do it in steps. Laura, we'll have you go first, and then Beth, and then Leah, in that order. In no particular, this is just the order you're on my screen, so I'm just kind of going clockwise. So, and again, I know that's a burden. Sometimes when I do this, people sit for like a minute and think about it, and I have to like edit around that because you don't want dead air. That's terrible. But it is sometimes it's so people are like, wait, I gotta come up with the best word. But I'm sure you have a word or phrase, whatever it is. But that will be the way that we close out the episode. So I'll say your name. Do you give the word the phrase? And they'll say the next name, next word or phrase, etc. And that'll be how we wrap it up. So, Laura, what do you have for us?
I have a quote for you by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with Wolves. And it's go out in the woods, get out. If you don't go out in the woods, nothing will ever happen and your life will never begin.
Very good. Beth.
Yes, this is a hard act to follow. I'm drawn to saying that to look in the non-human and the human world for that which is happening which we don't see. What's happening beyond our sight that gives us hope.
Very nice. All right, Leah, you'll take us out.
Following the way of an acorn, cracking open to reveal our hidden wholeness within.